we have a larger audience coming back after coffee, very refreshed faces. We have a wonderful second panel, and this panel will be helmed by Om. And it is titled India's Rice Future, Climate Change, Sustainability and Consumer Pull. Very interesting subjects to speak on. For those of you who are not here when I introduced Om at the beginning of the day, when he kickstarted ICA Weekend, let me just introduce him to you again. Even though he's shaking his head very vigorously, they're saying, no, don't do that. But Om is at the cross sections of agriculture, food and digital technologies with his work. He writes on food, society and politics. He runs Folktales with Tanushri, which has been listed as one of the 50 most luxurious experiences to have by Business World. They've also been mentioned in Vogue, Live Mint, Lonely Planet, the Hindu Good Times TV show, and more. And so now I hand the stage over to Om.
Thank you, Ruth. So this is not how the 2 days will go. This is the last time I'm coming on stage. So apologies if you already hit my face. But so just to introduce the panel, first panelist, Vijay. Vijay is the CEO of, so Vijay Pratap Singh Aditya. He's the CEO of ekgaon Technologies. If you haven't heard of ekgaon, you should. Much before one district, one product and market linkage and small farmers and all that became buzzwords, he was working with small farmer produce since 2013. Much 2010. So, and another mic, please. That should be another one. Yeah. And my second panelist is Sheetal Sharma from International Rice Research Institute. So, all the science questions that you had at the end of session 1, you can ask them now. So Sheetal has been working on, as the organization name says, but currently she also focuses on regenerative agriculture, and she will be answering all the science and tech-based questions. The third panelist is Dr. Eram Rao, again science and tech, food technologist from Bhaskaracharya College of Applied Sciences, Delhi University. So go ahead. The toughest questions you have, I have the panel for this.
Sorry, before we begin, just one quick housekeeping thing, so that your voices are captured well on the camera. But when you speak, just speak with the microphone as close to your office camera.
So we planned the panel in a way that we will cover production, we will cover the supply chain, and then we'll also cover consumer aspects, that how do people perceive rice and if anything needs to change there. So we'll move the way supply chain moves, start with production. Sheetal, I think we've also been, the first panel probably had murmurs about this and people have been talking about it. That rice has traditionally, we've been consuming rice for centuries, but lately it's also become the bad boy, right? Consumes a lot of water, it's bad for climate, and so science-wise, how much truth is there to those statements?
Thanks, Om. Thanks, Om, and first of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's a privilege to be surrounded by people like Vijay and Eram and you also, and the people in the audience, very different panel for me. I have always been in a panel where I was discussing with scientists. Coming to rice. So as a rice scientist working with the International Rice Research Institute for now more than 16, 17 years, I have studied the complex relationship between rice production and the impacts of rice production. And I agree that rice has been kind of a culprit in not only environmental issues, but also more lately on nutrition also, So I would like to say, yes, there are issues which were there in rice production, but with new technologies and innovations, there is a possibility of mitigating those. So if I come to the impacts of rice, we talk about methane emissions, the first of all. Rice contributes around 18% to the overall greenhouse gases, but it's because of not that rice is producing methane. It is because how we are producing rice, how we are keeping our rice fields puddled with water, that is producing methane. And we also know that from research, it is possible to produce rice with less water. Nowadays, producing rice with direct seeding, just like wheat, it is possible. So rice production per se doesn't require 3000 liters of rice per kg of rice grain production. It's the way how we are managing water in our rice fields, which is requiring more water, which is producing more methane. So one is methane production. The second again is water use. We talk about Punjab and Haryana, depleting water tables, etc. But again, we have technologies like alternate wetting and drying, direct seeding of rice. We can reduce the amount of water that can be used. While we are moving to now the second green revolution in the eastern India, this is what we are taking care of. How we can produce rice with less water, more sustainably, right? The second is like use of fertilizers, chemicals, etc. But that came with green revolution. That was the need of the hour back then, when we needed to boost our production. Now what we need is, we need to ensure that our natural resources are conserved. And for that, we have practices like regenerative agriculture, integrated management systems that can drastically reduce the chemical loads in rice production. The next is the climate resilience. Rice is grown in most of those areas with smallholder farmers who are highly susceptible to climate change. Floods, droughts, etc. And we need to cater to these farmers and ensure that they have resilient to these climate change issues. There are climate resilient varieties that are coming up. They are already over there. We have Swarna Sub-1 gene, which caters to floods. We have Sabhagidan, which caters to drought. We have a gene called Saltol, which was developed for salinity-prone areas. So there is already things in ground. What we need is the awareness among the farmers. So climate resilient varieties, improved agronomic management, like shifting from puddled fields to non-puddled fields, direct seeding of rice, including more regenerative practices in our production system, and then building capacities and creating awareness. I think there is a solutions. There are a number of solutions which are in place. We as scientists, we need to work with different sectors in order to take these technologies, translate them, and bringing them to the farmers so that we produce rice more sustainably.
Thank you, Sheetal. I think when we talk of agriculture, we only talk of farmers, and somehow, and which I have been saying, that we can't disconnect the farmer from the consumer and then say, okay, the farmer lives will improve. So Vijay has been, as you said, more than 10 years. And not just rice, you've been doing that for many other commodities. But does, your feedback on those 10 years of trying to create a market for niche products, transferring more profits back to the farmer, etc. Does the consumer care? Is the new consumer very different from the old consumer? How do you perceive those changes if they are in the market?
Sure. So I'll just take it from what Sheetal was just mentioning. So these guys create new varieties. We have to implement it in the field with the farmers, and that's the tough part, because farmers, whatever you want to talk about in terms of qualities, which are other qualities, in mind of farmer, there's only one thing, which is more production, because that's what has been pushed inside their mind over, from the first green revolution time, that increase the yield. Yield productivity is the consequence of so many years of our entire teaching from KVKs, Krishi Vigyankins and Atmas is all about that only. So intensification of rice, which we mentioned in the last, is one of the techniques of increasing productivity. And so the problem has always been from that the farmer's approach towards any crop is productivity. Now why productivity? It's very simple, to have more production and hence more income. That is the sequence of thinking. Now, if you do not want to accept as a consumer or a scientist or a policy maker, this very simple paradigm in the minds of a farmer, which believe me, 90% that is where the problem lies, is that you just keep talking about your, how great it is, but you never want to accept the viewpoint of the farmer, whose viewpoint is in this sequence of understanding. That's all that is. And starts from the income, how much income I can generate. Is the point that how do you assure a farmer that whatever he or she is growing, more she now, by the way, growing is the one which is going to get the right price in the market. That is where the entire story is. Now, if the price, which is generally moving, if you just see that last 10 years of price of paddy, I'll not say rice, but I'll say paddy, where so the price is ranging between 18 rupees to now, in some state to 26 rupees, that's 10 rupees of differentiation in terms of kilogram price over a period of, just to get you understanding, around 40% of that comes out as final output for consumers like you or anybody who's working on value chain of rice. So the point is very simple, that is what their income is. Now, if you just look into the food inflation or price inflation of commodities, and rice is also a seed for the farmer, it's an input. Fertilizer is an input, electricity is input. If you just add to that, see 10 years of inflation, everything is double or triple the price now. But farmer doesn't get double of the output. That is not changed. That is why you have protest on minimum support price. What farmer is saying, minimum. You have to assure this minimum I get. So that is the assurance that they want. So when we are talking about new varieties or different varieties or traditional varieties of rice, so what we have to understand is that we are talking about some of the things which are niche in the market and not the mainstream product in the market. So we can't compete with the price point, that is of the right varieties which are sold in shops across the stable. You go and just try to see what varieties are being sold. You will find the price is from now around 50 rupees to 150 rupees, depending upon on what variety, more basmati these days, unfortunately, which is not basmati. So this is what is happening. Now, in this sense, if I want to assure farmer that you grow this and I will help you sell this thing, then I need to assure the market and the price that at which the farmer finds that beneficial, because many of these varieties which we are talking about, you saw some of those samples outside, also have low yield. They are not as high productive in terms of production as other varieties are. So if the yield is low, and some of these aromatic, especially the aromatic variety, also has, you can't use a lot of insecticide because it directly affects the aroma of the crop. So which means it is attacked by the pest more, because pest will automatically come where there's nice aroma and very tasty. So pest also loves that, not just us. So they will also come there. So there's further loss in the crop. You're seeing the difficulty for farmer to grow the crop. So if you do all of this maths, then ultimately you need to give a farmer a price which is remunerative price. I use the term remunerative price, which essentially means that it covers my entire cost plus labor plus loss of productivity to come at that particular price. And then that is how you do pricing in the market. You can't do pricing other way around. So that is something we now have to, which I just try to tell in few lines, have to educate the consumer about. That is the tough part. You can't tell all of this maths to consumers. They won't understand, they don't care also. Very honestly, they don't care. बहुत महंगा दे रहे हो is the only thing we hear, farmer को कितना मिलता है. So we do a lot of things the way we try to reach out to consumer. One of the first thing is that we try to tell them that what we are selling is the genuine product. There's so much fake. I can tell you there are factories who are making grain, normal grain, mota anaj jisko bolte hain, mota dhan. They are just grinding it and putting spray in it, and that is being sold as aromatic rice in the market. That is also happening at a very large scale. You won't be, you'll be surprised about that. So we have to compete against that also, by the way. At the same price, by the way. That is also another problem that we have. They can reduce the price, we can't. So in this situation, in all of this, the only way we have to tell them that this is a genuine product. We need to tell them what we do is something called farm level traceability system, which is a technology based system that we have, that this crop is being grown by this farmer. So there's a whole traceability chain which you can scan a barcode and find out. So that's another way we can try to convince. And then we let the product speak for itself. Once the product is there, good quality product, then they try to make it in the kitchens, and then suddenly, you find a difference. So product speak, and this is a very, very slow process, unfortunately, for us. It's a very slow process, takes a lot of time for convincing, but once it happens, like in my family, we only used to have not earlier, in recent past, only used to have basmati rice, so-called basmati rice. But in last 5 years, we have all shifted to one of the favorite varieties that we use called Kali Moj. Sample is outside. Now we have shifted to that because everywhere, now in all my family, extended family, everybody is using only that. I haven't forced them ki yehi khao. It's just that they have themselves understood. They got the product and they understood and they liked it, and over a period of time they accepted the properties and changed. But this is a very, very slow process. And that is where education comes in. And education can't be done by me or nor the farmer. This is not essentially our job. And now this job comes to other people who are there in the ecosystem, food ecosystem, which is where I think is an area where we all should try to work on this. Sorry about the long answer.
No, thanks. That's very interesting. So, Eram, I think education is what you do for a living anyway. So, right, and we have discussed this not just about rice but other things, but rice specifically, and we have seen that echo since the morning that rice is not healthy, or rice you need to be careful about, etc. And we'll probably have, when we open for audience questions, we'll have a ton of those too. Just to preempt those, I mean, you have been talking about holistic eating and not thinking about chemicals and compositions, etc. What's the right approach? If I'm a consumer, like an urban consumer, then what's the right approach to think about rice on the platter?
Right, thank you, Om, and thank you, ICA, for having me. I think I'll take off from where Mr. Vijay left, educating, which it's easier said than done. I think education is most difficult. You try teaching something, and there's always a reverse side of that, but I also agree that this is something which has to be done collectively, right? It has to come from within. The people who are responsible for food safety, FSSAI per se, they have worked on that Eat Right movement. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, and simple messaging. We can't confuse the consumer. There's too much of information on the highway, and they do not know what is right and what is wrong. So to begin with, we have to understand that which is the biggest investment of your life. I think thanks to COVID, all of us have understood that we do not know how long we are around. And what we need to do is invest in our health. So when it comes to health, I think the first bell which rings in my mind and your mind is food, right? I'm not getting into the food quality, that will be another discussion another day, but certainly when I'm selecting food, what are the do's and the don'ts. So if you look at your plate, there is something called as a healthy eating plate. If I can just kind of ask the audience, how many people are familiar with this, a healthy eating plate? Nice. Quite a few, I think here it's about 10-15% certainly know about it, A lot of it is put in the scientific domain also. There's a Eat Lancet plate, which is categorically telling us a pictorial diagram of your plate divided into two. Half of it should be filled with nothing. In my language, I will tell you enzymes, phytochemicals, pigments, make it as colorful as possible. Any guesses what is that? Fruits and vegetables both. Having said fruits and vegetables, those, not the exotic ones, I'm repeating the word in the morning, the session was happening. Just look around you. What are we trying to do? We need to build an ecosystem, and we have to help each other. So what grows around you is best suited for you. So it has to be regional, it has to be local. Coming back to that word of sustainability, this is one of the solutions. And when we talk about doubling the farmer's income, it can't happen by the press of a button. It'll happen when you do these small little things on a daily basis, consciously, unconsciously. When my children see me doing this, they automatically like those fruits, they start eating those fruits, right? This is an aspirational society. They want to look at everything which looks beautiful, right? So again, when I use the word exotic, flavorful, colorful, are we all alike over here? And being a teacher, I tell this to my students that the eligibility criteria is your performance. It's never we put in a height requirement or a weight requirement or a color requirement. So why is it when we go shopping for fruits and vegetables, we want everything uniform? Be it color, be it size, be it shape, and we do this cheat teda hai, we don't want this, right? Are we all alike? No. So this is where I think, very, very small things happen. So coming back to your balanced plate, when you talk about half the plate filled with fruits and vegetables, another fact of the matter in India is that ours is a carbohydrate-rich diet, right? So we need to start understanding that how much of carbohydrate is really required. And more than the carbohydrate-rich diet, it is also filled with white foods. So even this carbohydrate, which I was, eating, then and now, has become super refined. Because again, we've been left with those, I think, indelible marks of the Britishers that everything which is white is supposed to be the best, So we want everything white. And I'm quoting data since I work very closely with the food industry, that they tried changing the color of the atta. Right? When you prepare a chapati, it's amber color. So I think since you work in Madhya Pradesh, Sharbati Gehu is the best, right? How many children of this day know about it? I do not know they can even name the variety of that, right? Now when you make a chapati out of that, it becomes this a little off-white color. The clients tell them, when they do these surveys in the market, that we want white-looking chapati. Of course, thanks to that advertisement regulation which has got in, we used to have this erstwhile this ad on the air where this lady is preparing the chapati. I shall not drop any names. And this child comes to know the father has parked his vehicle. The chapati had to be really right for him to enjoy that. It was withdrawn and they had to pay through the nose, So this is all kind of subtle messaging. So coming back to that rice question, whether it's good or not, for us, everything which nature has produced needs to be consumed. It has to be, according to the season, right? So let's say we're talking about millets, we did mention about it. Millets essentially, we talk about yin and yang food, hot and cold foods. You've got to go by the season. Nature produced them during winters because you need to have warm foods. They keep your body warm. Number two, you have to also have them in the right format. So today we're talking about millets, but if I look around, the millets have been super processed. And are they really those millets which we were talking about, rich in fiber, B-complex vitamins, etc.? And also some processing technologies are important. You need to soak them. Some amount of dehulling has to be done because they come with them also with anti-nutritional factors. Remember, it's not very easy to digest that. So that is why if you go back to the Indian tradition, which I'm very fond of, we used to soak it, we used to hull it. There were few grains we only had during the daytime. They were never consumed during the night time. Why? Because enough amount of time was given for you to move around, digest it before you go to bed. Now when you talk about rice, we've talked about, I've heard myself, and thanks for educating me, that there were 1 lakh variety of rice over there. And now only 5% of it is left, So I'm also familiar with just here and there names of them. But again, if I talk about rice, what is good about rice? If anybody can tell me, why do you eat rice? It's just because we are exposed to eating right from our childhood. But you do have very nutritious rice out there, which is called as parboiled rice. There is brown rice, which is a fad, right? But there has always been a parboiled rice. And thanks to the IRRI scientists, they have developed this particular process where you soak the paddy. You seep in all the nutrients. The goodness of the B complex goes in over there. You talked about pest resistance. So when you go and process it, it's not going to break. It's going to have extended shelf life, and it's much better to consume that particular rice. So whether it is my rice, whether it is my wheat, whether it's my millet, it is the portion which is important. So my remaining half of the plate now is still incomplete. 1/3 of it should come from the carbohydrates. The choice is yours, what you want to have that, right? But the best thing is rotate the grains. Do not stick to the same grain. Rotate the oils. Like we rotate the vegetables, God has made them in a particular season. Fruits also applies the same thing. So good and bad, everything is good when you have it in moderation. Do not glorify any food and say this is a superfood and go complete binge on that. So this is something which we do not recommend. I hope that answers your question. Too long an answer, sorry for that.
Coming back to Sheetal, I think when you're discussing rice, and also the writing prize is themed around rice, and we thought the geography of rice, because you work much beyond India, right? So the entire South Asia and Southeast Asia. So rice cultures and the rice geography is actually much more expansive than just India. And you're currently working on many more projects which are outside of India. How does that then, I don't know if the market challenges are the same, but essentially the science thankfully remains the same, right? So how are you doing that transfer? Like, does India look specifically, we had a big rice market, but does that affect your projects?
Okay, if I get it right, you are, trying to understand if the Indian market and the market outside of India, it behaves differently, right? Especially for us researchers.
And
right.
The transfer, if
Yes,
anything that happens.
That happens. Certainly, everything that we do, the research we do has to be context specific. We can't just take one technology from one area and just put it over there in another area, because the geographies are totally different. The consumer preferences are totally different. I have currently 2 projects ongoing in Indonesia, and there the rice production is like different. We are talking about production sites which are swampy, which are not even like what we see over here. We are talking about rain-fed areas, though even in India we have a lot of rain-fed areas where rice is produced. So we need to cater our research to the location-specific needs. And also the varieties, if coming to the varieties, in general, low GI, everywhere people wants to have a low GI variety. Thankfully, I would just like to take this platform to mention that IRRI recently has discovered a gene which has a very ultra low GI gene, which is like less than 44. It has a GI of 44 basically, which is near to the millets. And this gene can be introduced in any mega variety. So there are breakthroughs that are happening which are applicable across the world. Everywhere, people are looking for rice varieties which are low in GI. They are looking for rice which is sustainably produced now. We get a lot of requests from governments and even from private sectors now. Everybody wants to reduce their carbon footprints. Every conglomerate wants to reduce their carbon footprint. And they come to us like, can you help us producing rice more sustainably? Can you educate our farmers on what technologies they should adopt to reduce water, to reduce greenhouse gases from rice, to reduce the chemical load that we put in rice? So in general, there are few things which are common across geographies. But if you look at country-wise distribution, the demand is different. And I would say even in India, we are talking about nutrition at this platform. For me as a rice scientist, I see rice from 2 perspectives. One is the nutrition, where we cater to, a little higher income people. But what about the low income people? What about the smallholder farmers, the poor people? They are looking for rice as just one extra meal on their plate. So we need to think about not only nutritional security, but also food security. And across geographies. When I work in Indonesia, there people are now talking about nutritional security because they've already got food security. They are producing more rice than what they need. Same in India, we're producing more rice what we need. But when we work in Africa, their farmers are looking and people are looking, just produce more rice for us. Just increase the yield of the rice. Just increase the rice which is now being produced at 3 ton per hectare to 6 ton per hectare. In Indonesia, they're already getting 10 ton per hectare. And what they want to do? They want to reduce water over there. They want to reduce chemical load over there. So there is variation among the countries, the regions, with respect to localized needs. But in general, healthy rice, climate resilient rice, and sustainably produced rice is the need of the hour which we are seeing across globe.
I will probably hold back my questions because going by the first session, I mean, the more interesting questions came from the audience. So, yeah.
So I started my question in the last session. So I research a lot about rice and millets, both the things, like, you know, arsenic present organically and inorganically, both the forms. Why are organizations, government not working on this thing? Like we promote brown rice more on white, which has more arsenic, because you can't remove from the bran, which is present in the outer layer. And if you see the YouTube videos, you check in European countries, they promote and they work on that arsenic and these things while promoting rice. And in Asian countries, they don't let the videos out in the YouTubes and other formats.
Okay, I think I'll just disagree over there. We are working on arsenic, you know, not only, when I say we, I don't mean IRRI, but all the research organizations who are working in the rice domain. If you see the this Indo-Gangetic plains, and if we look at UP and other, there are specific areas which has very high load of arsenic over there. And when you grow any crop over there, you know, it's taken up in the crop and it comes to the supply chain. There are research organizations which are working on it. I have currently 2 students from Banaras Hindu University who are working with me specifically on this topic, how we can reduce the arsenic uptake. We can't reduce the arsenic in the soil because it's from the parent material. But what we can reduce is the uptake of this arsenic in our crops. So we are, I mean, one of the technologies which we have identified is fortified biochar. So iron fortified biochar can actually help reduce the uptake of arsenic in the crops. The second, it is also working with the national partners on developing varieties which inherently take less of these heavy metals. So I would say, like, it's not that it's not happening. Probably we need to make it more aware. Yes.
Hi, my name is Rushina, and this is a sort of question that's overlapped from the first session as well. One point that's been made strongly in both sessions is that, you know, when we research and we talk about specific things, when we commoditize an ingredient, we tend to sort of flatten everything out because it's easier. And as somebody who does a lot of work in the chronicling and researching aspect of ingredients, one of the things I feel that we haven't done justice to is the context in which an ingredient exists in its parent cuisine or culinary culture. So what we were saying about millet, suddenly everyone was eating millet 24/7, but traditionally in our diets, millets were eaten at a certain time of the year, like ma'am was saying. Is it possible at a research level, and it's not a question specifically for anyone, but is it possible at a research level to also record information like this? Because at my level, I don't have access to the diverse people that you guys are talking to. But it's great if while we are doing the science research, the traditional research, this information can be recorded, because I feel it's also doing a disservice to the consumer, and not because of anyone not doing something, but it does a disservice to the consumer because he's then glorifying it into a superfood and eating so much millet, or, you know, the keto diet, for example. Suddenly everyone was eating so much meat, and then you are doing a lot more harm to your body than you are benefiting it. So is it possible to kind of create a repository or just document this at ground level?
No, I was going to hand it over to you only for this answer, but I just want to mention over there, just like thinking about how our traditions were, if you look at any festival in India, rice is a key ingredient over there, and it takes us back to thinking like why rice was there. We need to think in that way, that why rice was there when brides are going from their houses, why they are giving rice, It's like it was a main ingredient of our system, of our traditions. Any festival in India, any tradition that is there, rice is a key part of it. People even keep rice to ward off evil eyes, they put it over there. If you go to Odisha and Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh area, so they use that. And it's, I think those things, if we start thinking about it, it starts to make sense. But yes, again, how we make them documented and made people aware, I think Eram is the best person to talk about that.
No, nothing much, but just to add on to that there is this documentation work which is happening. Of course, it's very sporadic, but I know that there's one body where I am part of it. But I've taken that suggestion. We are writing everything about it. It's like tracing back the roots and what is the best form to prepare it and have it, because the processing technique also is very important, right? So sometimes the consumer gets it in a form and he destroys it because of lack of, it's just ignorance about it. So I think yes, and I think word of mouth and making a human chain, which I always repeat myself, that each one teach one, if you're willing to ask each other and learn from each other.
One thing which also comes in my mind is last year we organized a very big event on there's an organization called Agriculture Museums, International Association of Agriculture Museums. They have been organizing events on agriculture and food across the world, and we've brought them first time to India. And we organized it in Himachal Pradesh, where more than 150 people participated on the agenda of agricultural heritage as such. One thing that is, so you remember the word museum. I was just coming to that. One thing is that how do you, if you want to visit your culture, how do you, where do you want to see it besides books and others? Avenue is that's something called museum. There's a way of preserving it, restoring it, and then representing it in a particular storyline, and then you try to understand. Although our museums are also very bad, but have you find any food museums or agriculture museums which are of that particular quality? There are one or two museums which are there, are just talking about 30, 40 years of 50 years of agricultural technology per se. Like one in Pusa here. So there, the problem is there that food is the most important ingredient in our life. We cherish food as a tradition. Tanu writes about that from centuries on many from festivals and religion and whatnot and everything. But when it comes to even finding more about it or celebrating the idea of food, there's no way, there's no museum or place where it is stored, or there's a storyline which talks about there used to be processing technologies which are very local, indigenous processing technologies. Sab kehte hain ki we cold press oil and stone milled flour. All of these fancy things are just coming. There are many such technologies which were there, which were locally relevant and locally available there. There's a storyline which goes with every food. 95% of the food that we eat today was not there 100 years back in India. More than 95% in fact. All the vegetables except probably for bagan, there's none of that is Indian. It all came in last 100, 200 years in India. So there's a food, so just ask sometimes, what we used to eat 200 years back. You'll be shocked that, acha ye bhi nahi khate the, ye bhi nahi khate the. You'll be surprised at what we used to eat. Where was those so-called claims of multiple things which are there in many of our traditional documentation, which is where research comes in, which is where there's so much of fake information which is processed in the name of tradition, also in so-called multiple ways in which we talk about it. So there's a lot of work which needs to be done in terms of documentation, a lot of work, and then that needs to be presented out to audience. All of us, some would have scientific tempers, some would have just, we want to know about our tradition. So there's a lot work. So something that we are planning to start, or not just planning, we are already in talks right now, is that we are working on 3 museums right now. One is in Himachal, one is in Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh, and third one is in Madhya Pradesh. These would be more community-centered museum, agriculture heritage museums. We are working on these 3 projects, and hopefully in 3 to 4 years' time they will be live, in which we'll be documenting the local traditions of food and agriculture and presenting it in a presentable format for communities to see. And our idea is not just limiting to that, our idea is to have hundreds of such museums all across the country. We don't want a big museum in Delhi. That's the worst thing to be done to museums. We want hundreds of museums dispersed across, because there's such a large diversity which is had. And for that we need documentation. There's already a project that we are doing on that documentation in the form of oral traditions. And then more research will be working with Anu and Om here also on that in coming years. So that is something which is required. And ultimately, because there's a science part of it, there's a tradition part of it. And both needs to bring out aspects that we want to understand for the journey of a food from a farm to our tables.
Hi, I'm Ruchi. I run something called as Taru Naturals. We also work with small-scale farmers across India. And we actually extensively work with rice, especially heirloom varieties, where the seeds would be, 100 years old or even 150 years old in seed banks, which you just can't find. And my question is, especially for the research part of it, I find that when we started working with black rice in probably 2016, there was no processing on the ground as well. And we had to really work on how do you make that black rice black, especially for the chefs community. And also the resilience part of it, because we had to literally work on the transplantation. If you leave it out for 2 days, it's going to be more black in color than, if you, as opposed to transplanting it immediately. Things like that, or what are the different varieties to sort of multi-crop with the black, and this is just, I'm saying that. Or even if you're working like with a Buster red rice, why a Buster red rice as opposed to say a Palghar red rice? What is the difference in the nutrition and all of that? And I also found that there's a lot of digestion issues with what rice variety comes, say, for us to eat. And I feel that the nutritive value of tracing that with the rice varieties may not be very accessible to people who want to market it to consumers. That is the first thing. The second thing is a processing bit, because it's very hard to process it in a conventional mill. So we had to actually find a rubber mill to process that and sit down with the village guy, and that's how it's actually scaled up, because we fixed those issues on the ground. And now everybody's doing it, which is great. So that's the second one, the processing. And the third thing is, 200 years back, and it's a really good point, there was probably an agroforestry model with rice. So that research on agroforestry model is also probably something which we are lacking. And how do we bridge these 3 things, So with, of course, the cultural traditions, etc. So I would love to know that how, it's a really beautiful thing, the research aspect of it, the bank, and but are we also looking into these 3 aspects? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for bringing them up, actually. I would say, let me just take back you to how we research, right? So there was this before the Green Revolution, when we went into the famine, the entire onus was on increasing the production. And that's where, everybody started to focus on these high-yielding varieties. And all these traditional varieties, indigenous varieties, took a backstage over there. We started to look at how we can increase the production, these new high-yielding varieties were what, and these were high input responsive varieties. So we started to put in more fertilizers into it. They needed more pesticide, herbicides in order to produce more. Now, what we are seeing is that we are seeing that shift. As a researchers, I'm talking about. We are seeing that people are more interested into looking at more nutritious rice, bringing back the indigenous varieties, like the institutions like yours are working now to mainstream these traditional varieties. And now the researchers like us are also started to looking at how we can, develop a package for these varieties. We can't have the same package and practice which we follow for high responsive, high yielding varieties to the same varieties. We at ISARC, which is our IRRI South Asia Regional Center at Varanasi, we are evaluating different rice varieties for low input systems. Now these varieties, they need not very high amount of fertilizers. They don't need insect pest management if we bring in ecological intensification into it, ecological engineering into it, which is like bringing different plant types together, bringing sunflower, bringing marigold on the bunds. All these will help to reduce your pest load eventually. So there is already a research which has started on this. We are already seeing from our experiment, like 3 years of experiment, I can say now that these varieties need a different management system. We need to bring in different organics into it. We need to improve the overall soil health, so that the nutrient supply in the soil itself is improved. We don't need fertilizers, etc. for these if we are able to develop a package which is low input intensive. Secondly, coming to your point on agroforestry models, there's already a lot going on actually in that. And we now also have some of the systems which have been developed where trees can be grown on the bunds of rice, and it can even, add income to the farmers. We talk about doubling farmers' income. Rice alone is not going to double the income. Cereals alone are not going to double the income. We have to diversify over there. And agroforestry is, I think, one of the best models. Bringing in crops like moringa. It's now becoming so popular, so superfood. So these kind of agroforestry models are being researched on, being documented, but again, I think we lack awareness, we lack communication, and we need to develop more knowledge products around that. So it's being done. I think the platforms like this, thanks to Om and your company to bringing us all together in this hall, and so that we can, share, and we know where we are lacking. I think we need to work on our communications and developing the knowledge material around that.
This is exactly what we wanted, that small room with intensive conversations. Sadly, there is something called a schedule. So let's combine the questions, 2 more, and then we take answers. There is a lunch, so all of us can actually talk around lunch. So 2 questions and combine them.
Yeah, I have a question for Sheetal ma'am. I am working with a group of farmers who sell traditional rice varieties to consumers directly. Not in a city setup, but it's in a semi-urban and village setup. So one issue they face is that, like, one primary issue is processing. The secondary issue is that people ask them for a rice variety, like keeping in mind a particular disease. Like, say they ask, like, I have some disease, and then they specifically ask for a particular rice variety. For example, there is a variety called Poongar in Tamil Nadu, which is like known to increase women's fertility and then reduce abortion risks. So like initially, so they are also, actually farmers themselves are fed up with this, because like they are saying that like we are not like doctors. So they're used to the idea of tablets. So like they almost like treat traditional rice varieties as like tablets, like so they need one variety for one issue, something like that. So on the other hand, like I also see there is some sort of a research going on the nutritional aspects of rice varieties. And also, so I attended a conference where people from Indian Institute of Rice Research from Hyderabad. So they came there and then they did like present some of the nutritional qualities and even like some the capabilities of rice varieties to tackle some diseases. So but there is no, like the research is going on in particular area, and then there is this a completely different way of selling and then interaction happening amongst the farmers and the consumers. So I want to know what is the status of the research? Like, so are traditional rice varieties like actually helpful in tackling specific diseases? And if yes, or if no, how can we communicate? I mean, how can we bridge the gap between the research and the farmers? Not just the consumers. Like consumers, like at least the people who are in cities, they have some sort of an access to the research. But like, for example, imagine a place like in a semi-urban or town setup. So how can we communicate this sort of research to them? So yeah, there are like 2 questions here.
While you think of the answer, we'll take the next question.
Hello sir, I am Ravindran Kumar sir. So while you were talking about the MSP sir, legal guarantee for MSP sir, just I wanted to ask, is it practically possible to implement legal guarantee for MSP? Because if we go through the data, in 2020, the total value of crops covered under
I'll stop you there. We'll talk about rice. If it's not a rice-based question, we'll take it over lunch.
Actually, sir was talking about MSP.
No, we'll not take it here. We'll talk about MSP at lunch.
Okay.
I'll make sure you guys to meet. Ishita, last question.
Wait.
One question.
I'll go with just a small input, because it was all about research, and especially I wanted to ask about his point about reducing arsenic and all the carcinogens in the crop. And we find in our research that indigenous seeds, especially, and varieties respond very well to the indigenous cow dung preparations, which were always traditional. And we find that if that, like you said, fortified biochar, but rather than that, supposing the indigenous, cow based fertilizers are used, we find the carcinogens are reduced. And what is the research going on in that is my question.
Okay, so I think I'll answer her question first and then I'll come to you, because that will be a little long answer. So to answer your question, I think when we talk about indigenous cow dung, what we are talking about is that these cows are naturally fed. They are not fed with feeds which is produced with a lot of fertilizers, lot of insecticides and pesticides. It's the entire food chain you have to look, right? So certainly when you are using the cow dung of traditional cow varieties, the overall load of chemicals in that is already reduced. And when we use cow dung or, vermicompost, FIM produced from high yielding cows, they are already fed with so much of chemicals, etc. And probably, I'm not a scientist expert in that, but I have heard that indigenous, the ruminants over there, they have an ability to reduce the heavy metal load. So I have read it somewhere. It's not from me, but I think there is a research which is ongoing. For us, we are still evaluating how these totally organic and natural farming systems will have an impact on, first, food security, because we still need to produce a lot of rice, and second, on nutrition. So that is where we are focusing on right now. But I think there are different research groups who are working on exactly what you are mentioning. I'll look into it and I'll share with you. Yes.
After you.
Okay, this one or the second one?
The first question. Yeah.
Okay. So coming to your question, I think again it turns down to communications and bringing different sectors together. We as a researchers, we publish in research journals, etc. But then we also go into the field, we interact with the farmers. What we want is the grassroots level organizations, whether it's the NGOs which are directly working with the farmers, whether they are entrepreneurs which are directly working with the farmers, even the startups now. So that chain has to be built. Who can take this research directly to the farmers? We in IRRI have a rice knowledge bank. It's online. I think I don't know how many people use it. We see a lot of hits on that, but I think it's more students, you know, who are looking for how rice is grown, which rice variety works where. It's not the exactly producers or rice producers. For them, we need to build that chain of knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing. I think that would be the key. And taking advantage of the digital agriculture nowadays, radios, televisions, you know, even WhatsApp. Nowadays, every farmer wants to be on a WhatsApp group, and they keep interacting with us on that. So it's like indirect and direct communication channels and knowledge sharing channels that have to be built up.
Sometimes we see farmers in an isolated world in which we are very knowledgeable and they are not. This is, I think, the worst crime that we are committing ourselves. They are in the same ecosystem as you and me. So, but the only thing is that anybody can make extraordinary claims. You know, we had a Pushpak Viman and we were flying 3,000 or 5,000 years back and all the things. Extraordinary claims like these require extraordinary research. You know, you need to justify extraordinary claims, whether eating this rice will increase your fertility or eating that. These are very, very extraordinary claims. Unfortunately, we fall for it. We always fall for it. And this is where I think the worst thing which is happening. And for everything we call it research. You know, for everything, unfortunately, we just, there's one research which is saying this. For example, we were talking about using cow manure and desi cow, and there's a whole fad of desi things, A2 milk and all that is going on, utter nonsense, but unfortunately this is the fad which is around that. So there's Asian Agrohistory Foundation, which was set up in ICRISAT a long time back, and it's now based in Pantnagar University. So they identified from our traditional books one of them is called Vriksha Ayurveda, which is an Ayurvedic text on, it's a compilation, it's not a book, compilation on basically traditional practices being on plants and crops, which is there. Now, currently Pantnagar University is conducting research on some of those. One you might have heard called Panchkavya, is a formulation of urine, cow urine and everything. So they are working on a research on it, and they are trying to find whether there is some benefit of that. Because you are asking that question, right? Because it's a general perception. But the truth is that such research takes years. This is not like, maine dala or kal ko, there's magic happening there. This is not there. This is complete unscientific and even illogical. But somehow we want to believe it because it's so-called tradition. This is not wrong. This is completely wrong way of looking at. Such claims need scientific evidence. These are long-term research. Unfortunately, in our country, long-term research are not funded. Ask any scientist, they will tell you. Our maximum research is 4 to 5 years period. In crop research, you need to do 20 years research. Not there, right? So you can't claim the things that we are trying to claim are completely not the right way. And my request always has been that you look it from a point of view of a farmer. We as middle class consumers have this habit of, going traditional suddenly and going postmodern suddenly. But we never think about the farmer who is actually producing what you are consuming, right? Think it from their point of view and try to understand and what ecosystem in which they are producing this is the ecosystem that we are providing them, right? We need to, if we are responsible consumers, then the farmer will be responsible to us. That connect between the farmer and the producer is broken. You need to trust them, then only they will trust you. They definitely don't trust you. That is why MSP. I'll talk to you later.
Sheetal, last question. Yeah.
Really, really thank you to all the panelists for bringing out the co-culture of rice. I was really, really hoping that, if ICA kind of facilitates a book on keywords on agriculture, rice can be that keyword to a set of co-cultures. You talk, Sheetal, very rightly you point out that rice is not only eaten by middle class consumers who can probably pay a premium, but also, it because we are talking about food sufficiency, as somehow the health, an understanding of health and nutrition also needs to feed into the farmers. From that perspective, if you could just foreground a little bit of co-culture during because there was a lot of time, particularly around the Bangladesh, the Indo-Gangetic plain, there was a lot of discussion around the aquatic culture around rice, right? Particularly fish, and there's a decline of the fish, and given that shrimp farming have been on the rise in this particular belt, because that's your forte, if you could foreground a little bit about what has it led to this part of the co-culture.
Ishita is a professor with the South Asian University. Explains the question.
Got it. Yeah, thanks. I don't have the exact answer for you right now, but probably I'll certainly look into it. But I can, just tell you something about rice fish culture, which has been there. I think there are two things around that. One is your traditional eating habits, where you were initially eating rice fish together in that part of the world, whether it's Bangladesh or our West Bengal. And then is the market and demand. So, the farmers lately, the shrimps, why they, kind of came all of the sudden because of the market demand. And, we were also doing rice fish farming together. I tried to bring that from there to Odisha, and the farmers and the consumers said, the fish that is grown with rice is not the fish that the consumers of Odisha like. So we can't have that, right? You need to have a different set of practices where this co-culture will exist. And so it's very context specific. I don't have the exact answer, but that, kind of relates, because one is our eating habits and our traditions, and the second is how the markets are changing, how the consumer behavior is changing. And finally, for farmers, it's about income, right? They need to look at, they may be doing still rice, fish, rice together, but for commercial purposes, they are moving now to shrimp. So that's.
Okay. So we'll take the questions and see which ones need to be answered here and which ones over lunch.
So my question is to Dr. Eram. So you talked about the healthy plate. So, it just came to my mind whenever you go to any social media like Insta and you're scrolling, and now everyone has become a nutritionist and a health consultant. So when they show you the plate, the rice is completely missing. It's all supplemented with protein. Yeah. It's all either meat or lentils or whatever. So when we traditionally, the plate was designed, it was the mix of carbs, which was rice, and then the lentils, and then the vegetables and the salad, etc. So how do you think this is helping? Because this is helping, this is all doing a passive conditioning to all the people who are scrolling these reels, and especially the Gen Z or the next generation. They're totally, completely shifting from rice. They're looking at like it's a bad carbs to ourselves, and if you want to become lean, thin, so this is something which we should keep at a bay. So how do you see that? I mean, it's very difficult to, that is something I see a passive conditioning is being done, and which should not be, and there's no control, because every other video is talking about only protein.
You're right. So I think, as you said, that visual clues will tell your brain this is what is to be eaten, and that's what is happening. I would not say only rice. What I see is that any carbohydrate is projected as something which is vicious for yourself. Like, that's the actual, they have declared that as evil. But have you also noticed that that goes with a sugary drink, a beverage, or a coffee? So I get that question mark in my brain as you are getting that, how are you then justifying that, on one side? And this is simple carbohydrates. It's like a monosaccharide, which gives you that rush. It spikes your blood glucose, So, this is a dilemma, which again, I said that, just one point which I wanted to make here is that there is a dire necessity of nutrition literacy. And we need to catch people early. Don't get me wrong. That means the school curriculums now have to teach you life skills. I don't know how many people remember the first law of Newton and the second one and the third one, and where have we applied it? God alone knows, right? It's only when you suffer from a health ailment do you understand the focus or the importance. And we go back to this, the statement made by Hippocrates. But now I can't repeat that, because food cannot be the medicine in a certain sense, quote unquote, because it's also laid with so many contaminants, you know. We can just have the discussion. Some has been pointed out. It's just not arsenic. It's a list, you know. We're just focusing on one by one, you know. But having said that, at least, you know, what I would say is that if you treat those fruits and vegetables and your grains correctly, research, and I'm talking about scientific evidence, you know, that when you peel it off, when you blanch, when you heat process, 99% of the chemicals can be got rid of, you know. So simple processing of meals, you know, coming back, and I also think it's a lifestyle disorder. You know, all those food disruptions which have taken place, that, you know, whatever meal is cooked at home, you still have a choice to order something more. So I think that's where it's playing, you know, a spoiler. The demographics have changed, and eating together is no longer something which is happening, you know. So one meal of the day we all should sit together and at least have, but there also you find that each one has something different on their plate, you know. So I think parenting, and I blame myself if my daughter doesn't behave. So, you know, it starts very early. And I was on another panel discussion yesterday which was talking about processed foods for a purpose, you know. And we always forget that it's a lifestyle attitude, you know. You know, my child apes me. When I've sent my child to the school, what have I put in that tiffin? So a couple of years back, I had done a study with WHO, 2008, long time back, you know. We assessed the middle-level schools. I'm not talking about the public schools, middle-level schools, like, you know, not the government schools, you know, and not the public schools. We went to those schools and found out that what are the kids carrying in the tiffin boxes? Any guesses? Forget bread, even that has some vegetable in that. Yes, pasta, Maggi, yes, but primarily packs of biscuits and leftover of the last night's what you've eaten out. Can you imagine? So, you know, have you heard of acrylamides? Have you heard of PARs? Have you heard of HCAs? You know, when you have this non-vegetarian food which is barbecued, you know, that gives you a lot of these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, in simple words, lead to carcinomas, right? So, you know, so who's to be blamed? Is the government to be blamed? Is that processor telling you to eat that? Is that restaurant forcing you? It's I who's so lazy, can't just make any food which is interesting for my child, you know. So my children are not very, very old. I had to also get up and make it interesting, speak to them, what do they want, so involve them. And it's a lot of hard work, you know. So, and you know, these mothers said that they don't even get up in the morning to pack that tiffin. वो रात को ही बंद करके, they put in the fridge. The child is so nice, unlike my child. We'll take it out from the thing and go off to school, and the mother's sleeping. I said, my child will never reach the school, you know. And we were seeing them off on the bus stop also, कि सब कुछ ले आके, are you understanding? So I think your question, I don't know whether it answers or not, is the whole culture. You know, so this next generation people, like, you know, it's all shortcut, remote controlled, you know, biosensors, all this is very smart, you know. But if your food becomes smart, then you will become unsmart, you know, that is what.
Why? Because normally we will skip lunches at events. This is not that lunch. The chef is one of the longest serving chefs in any Indian commercial kitchen. He has co-authored a book. So we kind of sat together and picked up dishes from that book, which is cooked and is out there. So spend time on the lunch. We'll have a chat around the plates. Thank you, Pal.